Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. Today we're going to be talking about Fish War, a film documentary about the work to reinstate tribal rights, a decision that took place in the 70s but resonates today. This documentary is coming up to be shown at Lynwood Theater on Sunday, June 8th. And we're going to be talking with Ron Charles, the past chair of the Port Gamble S'Klallam Tribe, and Josh Bagley, who's the current vice chair of the Suquamish Tribe. I want to thank Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island for sponsoring Something to Talk About. We meet a few times a week here on the Senior Center, and Fieldstone is a sponsor we're grateful for. They offer independent living, assisted living, and memory care. They have beautiful campus up there on Rolling Bay, right around the corner from Bay Hay and Feed. You can check in with Randy or Jamie if you'd like to schedule a tour, or just visit fieldstonecommunities.com to learn more, and call 206-594-1010. Also, we are always taking a moment to acknowledge that we meet on the ancestral homeland of the people of the clear salt water, the Suquamish people, and tribes across the Salish Sea. And that's really our topic today, about the idea of learning from the ancestral stewardship of these lands and waters, so that we all can be better stewards of the resources where we live. Thank you very much, Josh and Ron, for taking the time to meet with us today. I really appreciate that. Can you tell us a little bit about the documentary Fish War, what it covers, and then we'll watch a little review of it.
Go ahead, Ron.
Well, back in the 1960s, I think that the rights of the Northwest tribes, after they ceded just about the entirety of the Washington state in the 8 treaties, they were guaranteed some things in the treaty, and it didn't take long before those things that they were supposedly guaranteed in the treaty started to disappear as more and more folks immigrated into the Northwest. And so it wasn't long after the treaties that there were problems with those guarantees. Like, we were guaranteed the right to fish and hunt and gather in all of our usual and accustomed areas. They even specifically said, you don't have to stay on your reservations. You can go and harvest wherever you always traditionally harvest. And that went a long way because tribal members said to the negotiators that, I'm afraid we're going to starve if we have to be in one place only on the reservation. And Stevens assured them that, no, this paper guarantees that you will always be able to harvest in your traditional places. That's the gist of the argument that erupted when the state started taking away, making new laws, drawing new boundaries, and stopping Indians from going into their traditional areas where they always had fished. And over the years, up until the 60s, the tribes were poor. They didn't have very good attorneys. And so they had a heck of a time fighting the state of Washington, who, I'm sure that there must have been attorneys for the state of Washington that knew that what the treaty said, what the law was, but they chose to ignore it, and it was political, because most of the residents, the commercial fishermen, the sports fishermen, agreed that they ought to do these things to stop. A lot of it was jealousy. Tribes might be fishing when the sporties were closed, and that wasn't, cool with them. And so in the early 60s, I think the state made somewhat of a decision that they were going to go all out and just do away with Indian fishing. And I think that I heard that they were the first state that actually decided that they were going to do that. And they had the public support. So if you were a politician in the state of Washington, why would you not be on that side of things? Because you could get unelected for agreeing with the tribal members. And at the time we were taking, in the early 60s, we were taking 5-6% of the salmon. And this, of course, the commercials were taking 80-some%, and the rest by sporties. And so that was the genesis, I guess, of the fish wars, as the tribes got to the point where they thought, if we don't do something now, if we don't act, if we don't get our thing together and start fighting this, we're going to lose forever. It's never going to happen. It's now or never. And let's have one last good go at it. And they started fighting back. And in the era of civil rights, where the Hispanics and the blacks and others were fighting for their rights, it was a perfect time for tribes to step in and take advantage of the atmosphere in the country at that point where there was some support. And the state, with their brutal tactics, played into that public sentiment, and it really helped the tribes. I mean, watching the video that we will see with the brutal arresting and beating of tribal members, which we wanted, our guys wanted that on the evening news.
So maybe we'll look at that, the preview anyway, for this movie that we're going to be looking at together on June 8th. So let me see if I can manage to make this work without covering the screen with other things. So you should be able to hear this just fine. I'll start the video, and then let me hide the meeting controls. There we go.
Fishing is our way of life.
That's our way of going to church and connecting with our spirituality.
And we've always been taught, when the tide is out, the table is set.
We're not a conquered people. We ceded this territory for just a little bit of rights.
But 60 years ago, my father was still getting his head bashed in on the riverbanks. He was getting his head bashed in Olympia.
The tribe's traditional practices became illegal under state law.
Our people fought for this. We fought for it, blood, sweat, and tears.
All we wanted to do was be able to exercise our treaty right, to be able to fish and hunt in our usual and accustomed grounds.
The object was getting in front of the feds.
We burned one of their bridges.
I said, sign me on, sign our firm on.
The state management was like a good old boys club.
Their position was racist. Wait till I get that guy on the witness stand.
All of a sudden, we're the bad guys. We're taking something away from the poor Indian who's never had anything.
Oh, is that kind of bullshit?
If all the fish go away, our treaty isn't worth spit.
I'm going to continue fishing, period.
Future generations should have a birthright to harvest fish from a river.
The state of Washington, they didn't want to tell people the truth. You know, it is time to tell the truth.
So that's a powerful promo for this relatively short documentary.
Definitely. And just to add a little bit on to what Ron was saying about the previous question, I just, my hands definitely go up to the people back then, our elders and relatives that put that language into the treaties, to know that here in the future we were gonna need to be able to fish off reservation, and they put that language in there and were smart enough and could look far enough in the future to make sure their next generations would still be able to fish.
Yeah, and I mean the idea that this was an agreement. I mean, as the movie and as you've already said, these are ceded territories. Your ancestors made an agreement, and according to the rules by which Governor Stevens was operating at the time, you should be treated as equal partners. Right? And that was basically what Judge Bolt decided eventually. Is that correct?
Yes. Yep.
So I was young, living on Whidbey Island, white community, when that Bolt decision came down. And I remember a lot of shock and surprise among the people I knew who were commercial white fishermen or sporties. What was the reaction in the tribes? There must have been jubilation.
Well, it was a mixed bag for tribes, both our tribes, I suppose, Suquamish and the Skyllams. I don't want to speak for Suquamish, but I think they were in a similar situation that we were in, is that the state had pretty much taken away all of our off-reservation fisheries. We weren't fishermen like they were on the Nisqually, Quinault. They had rivers running through the reservation, so they had a reservation fishery, Suquamish, them too. We didn't have a river, Suquamish didn't. So they had taken away, they had managed by enacting new laws, and by the early 1900s, they'd taken away all of our off-reservation fisheries. So we weren't involved in the original Bolt decision. There were 13 tribes, and a lot of those tribes were the ones
tribes
that had been fishing at least somewhat a small fishery on the reservations, and our people, or the Skyllams, they had pretty much turned to shellfish. We were shellfish harvesters.
Yep.
And so we weren't involved in the initial, we weren't one of the 13 plaintiff tribes that filed the lawsuit, and Suquamish wasn't either. We intervened.
Yeah, it was the same here. I remember the late 70s. I was born in 77, so I don't quite remember the 70s, but I remember in the early 80s, my mom and dad were both, they were clam diggers, and they bought clams, and we didn't get into fishing until the late 80s, so we didn't have a river, so we didn't get to fish on reservation, so we weren't one of the tribes that would go out and fish and get arrested, those were Nisqually, Puyallup, and some of the coastal tribes.
Thanks, Josh. So Ron, you were saying that the that these tribes that didn't have fisheries in their reservations intervened?
Yes,
Describe that for me, please.
it was pretty easy for the tribes, what, 7 or 8 tribes, I guess, that weren't a part of the original decision. It wasn't that much of a stretch for them to intervene, and the original 13 tribes didn't oppose us, and so it was a relatively easy process. It didn't take too long, and we were fully into the decision. We were a little bit behind because we didn't have our usual and accustomed areas established like the original plaintiffs. So we had to go through a process. It took us a few years to establish where we could document our treaty times off reservation fisheries.
And how difficult was the work once, I mean, you have at that point pretty antagonistic partners. You're having to figure out how to start to manage this resource across the state and then the collection of tribes.
For the tribes, after the decision, there was a period of time when we had one common enemy, the state, and they had lifetime, some folks that were managers of their fisheries, we call them Indian fighters, and they were dead set against cooperating with the tribes. And so it was easy for the tribes to manage, to get into management when we all had one goal. That was getting our 50% and opposing and the state fighting that. And there wasn't a whole lot of fighting amongst tribe to tribe. That came later when resources may have dwindled or there were disputes over boundaries between tribes. That came, and that goes on.
Well, and that you hinted something, and in the slides that were the promo that we saw, there are indications of polluted waters and difficulty with like the sustainability of the fish. And you just mentioned the idea that that it got more difficult when the resource started to dwindle. Where are we now, sort of in this effort, as we see a very fragile, we're coming to a fragile view of the world that we live on, and we have not, at least the settler society, the people who moved in, the immigrants, have not had a great heritage of thinking about balancing the environment and human life.
That, if you read history, as the United States expanded to the West, that was the history. Overuse of, cutting down all the trees, no thought about the future, about protecting things. I don't think it was real late before environmentalists got into trying to stop that and say we can't just be destroying everything, and but that was what was happening. And in fact, when the boat decision came in, there was the resource wasn't exactly doing real great then. there had been overfishing. And some streams were in trouble. Well, logging and dams were part of that. But yeah, there was little concern about the future. In fish management was done more politically than scientifically back in those days.
Winifred, I see has a hand up. Do you have a comment or question here?
Well, I have a question. And first of all, thank you both for participating. My question has to do with, and I know this is not in your historic territory, but the Skagit River. Because the Skagit River now, from what I understand, is basically devoid of certain types of salmon. And that's primarily due to all the damming. And the damming that has occurred is primarily due to the creation of power plants to serve Seattle. And so most of Seattle, the city of Seattle, gets their electricity from the Skagit River. And yet those were just as important, I would think, fishing areas for tribes, at least tribes that were located in that area. And I was wondering, are either of you involved in any of that, or is that another challenge that different tribes are dealing with now?
Yeah, that would probably be the Swinomish tribe or the Skagit tribe, one of those tribes that would be dealing with that Pacific River anyway, and getting the dams brought down or whatever, like they did up at the Elwha. The Elwha got their dam taken down up there. I know it took them a really long time, but they ended up getting it taken down.
Hey, Josh
So Charlie
yeah.
Kratzer, you want to get in here?
Yeah, so I'm the water resource coordinator for Suquamish Tribe, but only been there a year and a half. So I'm still learning the ropes here. But do you guys want to mention the role of the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission? Because they kind of represent in a way all the Puget Sound area tribes, and I've found them to be a really great resource for me, at least, on lots of different things. So how they might be involved in the Skagit and whatnot.
Well, first of all, on the upper Skagit tribe, I just heard a little bit about their problem up there with one of the species. I don't know if it was Chinook, but apparently they were supposed to have installed some sort of way for those salmon to
fish ladder
spawning grounds, and they didn't do it, and now that's a big fight that's going on right now. That and that probably happened a lot of places where dams or whatever is completely obliterated certain runs.
Yep.
And of course, this it's there. You can think of them as rivers, and certainly there are tribes that live and ancestrally, traditionally used those waterways, but we're all connected, and the fish go in and out of the rivers and into the Salish Sea, and so we all have a vested interest in trying to figure out how to move forward. I don't know whether that's something that's addressed in the Fish Wars movie, or if it's something that you might be talking about with your discussion a little bit afterwards, when that shows at the Lynwood.
I think it's a little bit of both. And to go back to Charlie's question about the Northwest Fish Commission, I just think they're great. They help facilitate the 20 treaty tribes in Puget Sound. They help us come to agreements with the 20 tribes so that we all come to a somewhat agreement between each other, and then they also help us negotiate between us and the state and us and the feds also. So they're great. They help, like I said, they're just great facilitators between the 20 treaty tribes, the state, and the federal government.
Yeah,
So
plus I know for me as the hydrologist, they do sort of coordinate all the hydrologists for all the various tribes too. We have our own group that meets every couple weeks online, and they point out possibilities for funding for projects.
Yeah, yeah.
So, for example, with the 6 ppd, the tire
Yeah,
particles, we've had a lot of discussions about that, and
I'm
there's some
sorry,
funding available. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Charlie, the 6 ppd.
6 ppd is a preservative that's put on tires, and it's found to be extremely toxic to coho salmon. And so there's been a lot of discussions with the tire industry on looking at a replacement for 6 ppd that will both preserve tires and not kill the salmon when it comes off. So
And I
anyway,
also know the Northwest Fish Commission is trying to come up with some kind of filter system to come to that goes through, or when that 6 PDD comes down through drainage system. So they're trying to get some kind of filter system so that before it goes into the sound, it filters that stuff out.
Right.
So does it seem as though in spite of or in the face of the challenges that we're facing, that there is progress in terms of the parties that are involved in this, or are there major issues right now that are certainly, like you just talked about, some environmental challenges that are forefront in your mind to preserve the dams? We mentioned the dams briefly too, I guess. Are those things that are forefront in the mind of either the Sklallam or the Suquamish or others that you know about?
Well, probably one that's important to all of us is the culvert case, and just getting the culverts all fixed up. I think that definitely helps all the salmon out, and it is, in my opinion, starting to turn things in the right direction.
So that's we're seeing this in our neighborhoods where formerly blocked passageways are being rebuilt so that culverts are replaced with living streams, right?
Yes. Yep.
And that's an expensive proposition, but does it seem as though we have the right legal backing to make that move forward?
Yes.
In your view?
Yep. It's case law that the tribes won already, and it's just being implemented now and getting it paid for.
So, I don't know, are there any, that was basically, I wanted to sort of set the table for the Fish War program. Are there any other elements that you want to make sure that the people on the call hear about today? I really want to thank you for introducing us to this and for setting up the documentary showing.
I'll go real quick first. I just think the Fish War is a great educational piece that helps people learn how the tribes aren't just out there fishing till the last fish. They do help the state co-manage, and we do make sure that we are co-managers so that we do make sure there's fish for our next generations.
I think from our perspective, and my perspective, I think that we're fighting a battle against time with certain runs that the jury's still out whether or not they're going to be saved. Look at the Fraser River in Canada. It's a beautiful, big, beautiful river that you drive by it and you can't imagine that there used to be, that river system had produced these fantastic runs. And now we are faced with seasons where we have a share of that run, those runs that we're able to harvest before they get into the Canadian waters. And it's gotten so bad that some years our fishermen don't even get on the water. There's just not enough salmon for a fishery, let alone feeding all the native tribes in Canada who've always relied on them. And they try like hell to fix the problems, but it's bigger than, so far, than any remedies that they've come up with. And, you know, some of it, I'm positive that it's global warming, where the waters in the fresh waters are not conducive to salmon surviving to get back to their spawning grounds. It's really a sad situation.
Indeed. Ron, Charles, the past chair of Port Gamble S'Klallam Tribe, and Josh Bagley, who's the current vice chair of the Suquamish Tribe, thank you very much. It's Sunday, June 8th at 6:30 p.m. At the Lynwood Theater. There's a charge. It's $15.25 for adults and $12.25 for seniors in military.
And you can get tickets online through the Lynwood Theater website. Yeah. Which you might want to do. I mean, yeah, because it is just
it's a one night.
Just Kevin there, you know, and he says buy lots of popcorn because that's where he makes his money. That's what I learned. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you all. I appreciate your time.